Mackenzie Johnston with Tri-State Livestock News, bringing you discussions concerning fair cattle markets. Today we have the opportunity to chat with Mike Eby. He is the Executive Director of Organization for Competitive Markets. Can you just tell me a little bit about your background and your involvement within the cattle industry?
Sure. So I am a seventh generation dairy farmer. My wife and I and four children had milked cows for 17 years. We just recently sold the herd in 2016. And after that point, I became heavily involved with dairy, the organization with National Dairy Producers Organization. I had been a supporter of them. I've been on the board ever since 2011. And that's where I really, would you say, maybe cut my teeth on the issues of antitrust, on the issues of consolidation within the industry, checkoff issues, GIPSA. I mean, everything seemed to relate very much to the cattle industry as well. And I then became aware of OCM and in 2017 and became heavily involved with OCM and now serve as their executive director.
What do you feel are the major issues standing in the way of fair cattle markets today?
Obviously, antitrust I believe is a big one. The packers having control of the industry. You know, you've asked some questions before in regards to the four packers, and you referenced them and having so much power within the industry. That is a stranglehold within, obviously. I mean, look no further than to vertical integration within the chicken industry. We most recently had a meeting in Florida with the cattlemen down there, and one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we hit home was the fact that the chicken industry is showing us by example as to what is going to happen in the cattle industry. And if, we don't answer to these things, you can pretty much see the fate on the wall.
What solutions do you think could be implemented to solve this issue?
Well, I believe a really good start would be the 50-14 rule, forcing the packers to have at least the 50% going through the auction houses. I mean, I think some of the simple solutions to that, basically leveling the playing field. I'm sure there are multiple solutions, but I would say anything that you could do, anything that one could do to seek to eliminate the concentration. Obviously, we're heading in that direction. It's pretty obvious to see that it's just continuing to become more and more consolidated. It seems like the dairy industry, it happened through the cooperatives, right? The cooperatives have found ways to consolidate the industry. We're seeing it now also in the beef industry.
Why do you think that our antitrust laws haven't been enforced throughout the years and has led us to this point within the cattle industry?
That's a great question. If you look back to the 1980s, it seems as if once Reagan became in office, I believe Reagan did a lot of good things for this country, but I do also believe that he's pretty much opened it up to become the wild, wild west. And I think there were those that found that as an opportunity, and they viewed this as, hey, now's our chance. The antitrust laws will most likely not be enforced based upon the way we're seeing the hat being tipped. Let's see what we can get away with. And I think it became very obvious very quickly that the DOJ was not going to step in place to call out those antitrust violations that would have been prior to 1980.
The USDA has proposed implementing RFID tags for traceability across the industry by 2023. What are your thoughts on this?
As a registered breeder of Holsteins, I identified my animals all the time. So at first I'm thinking, well, what's the big deal, right? I have to identify my animals. Why wouldn't I expect everyone else to do the same? They were, my cows were registered purebred Holsteins. I took the effort of actually drawing their outline of their pattern, on a piece of paper. So you would think, well, what would be the downside of having it be through RFID tags? I think the downside to that is that it does give the ability for the industry to further consolidate itself. It gives opportunities for those to come in who seek to want to control the industry by way of creating a choke point in the center. I think from a globalist standpoint, if you take a step back and look to see how this is going, you can look to see and say that, well, they will never be able to educate the consumers to the standpoint of forcing them to find value in the sustainability or find value in environmental impact. And it's going to be extremely difficult as well to do the same thing with the producers, the farmers, the cattle rancher. But if they can create this choke point in the center and control who dictates or who is able to sell to the marketplace for the consumers to even then purchase, you would then eliminate any possibility that would not qualify for whomever decides what sustainability is, and that's a moving target. So if they feel as if you as a producer are not operating in sustainable ways, we could then simply just eliminate you from being able to sell into the marketplace. And that's my fear of any RFID tags. It will give the opportunity of those who seek to gain control of the marketplace. It'll be a great opportunity for them to be able to do so. It would be a matter of just shutting off your tags. It's a huge problem that I see coming. I see, they of course sell the concept as, oh, well, this is great. This is a traceability issue. If we ever have a disease in this country, we can trace it back to the source. And I mean, all that sounds great. I guess my point in that is, if you're going to force it upon the American farmer or the rancher, why not then also have it enforced in other countries of food coming into this country, so that we can then trace it back to that? And that does not seem to hold the same priority level as what it does to be forcing it upon the American cattle rancher. And that to me also draws red flags. It seems to me more of a control issue than it does a disease prevention or a disease traceability issue.
You mentioned disease traceability. Namibia has reported 2 outbreaks of foot and mouth disease over the past couple of months, and the USDA has stated that we will continue to import beef from that country. Do you think this is an okay idea? Do you think this is a reckless move? What are your thoughts on this situation?
Well, in 2003, I remember it was my first years of dairy farming. It was such a big deal when mad cow disease came into play, and immediately they shut things down, and they really pulled back. And I think it was good for the U.S. cattle producer who didn't have it within this country. To see the position that USDA is taking now, as if, well, hey, it's no big deal, or if we don't have it in this country yet, we'll eventually have it. It almost appears as if they just simply don't care. Their globalist agenda is more important. They don't want to interrupt the flow of beef coming to this country because currently processors are counting on it. That's the issue. I think that's the bigger issue of all of this. Those who represent the industry are processor driven. Look at NCBA. A very small percentage of their membership are actual cattle producers. Look to see where the funding comes from. Yes, it comes from Checkoff, a lot of it through producers, but whom they really truly represent, if you just go down the line item, you can see very clearly that it's the interest of the processors each and every time.
So you just mentioned the checkoff. What are your thoughts on the petition circulating to bring about a beef checkoff referendum?
So I think it's a great idea. Anytime you get an opportunity to vote up or down, it's one of those things where we're not encouraging a producer who doesn't have a position on it at this point to get a position or to take a position just for the sake of having it go one way or the other. Mm-hmm. What we wanted to do is to provide an opportunity for the cattle rancher, or even if a dairy petition would be brought forward, have the actual rancher, the producer, understand what it is that the checkoff does, have a better understanding as to the purpose of the checkoff program. It started out as a promotion entity. It seems to now be used more for alliances, partnerships with organizations. And I think it just really needs to be questioned as to its purpose, and go back to the drawing board. Force them to then, with this referendum, it will send a very strong signal to those who are currently the recipients of it as to whether or not this is something, who are paying in, as to whether or not these producers really truly do find value in it. So I think, it's been 35 years or so that any opportunity has been given to a rancher to determine whether or not he wants the program to continue. What's the harm in bringing it up, having it be put forth for a referendum, call for the vote and see what producers want to do? I think that they owe it to the producers to be able to do so.
A few minutes ago, you mentioned imports. What are your overall thoughts on cattle and beef imports into the United States?
Yeah, another great question. I think that we're not going to stop imports completely. I'm not even advocating for that. But what I would say is that what we are importing, I would very much like the consumer to have full understanding what it is that they are eating. At this point, you have no idea. It could be from Brazil, it could be from Canada, it could be from Mexico. I think the most disturbing thing of all is the fact that the American consumer knows that we have a lot of farms in this country, and they just assume that because we have a lot of farms, that the beef that is produced in this country is what they're buying in the store, and that's just false. And I think we need to have verification, country of origin labeling, be mandatory. At the very least, there needs to be grocery retailers to be able to determine where the beef is coming from, so that way they could label it if they so choose. I've talked with many grocery stores and asked them if they would voluntarily label their beef, and they would say, well, we would if we would know. They can't even verify, and it's simply because the wholesalers that are selling to the grocery store, they're not specifying exactly where this meat is coming from. I mean, it may give you three countries as the possibility, but it's not specifying USA in particular.
What are your thoughts on the DOJ's investigation into the Big Four beef packers that is currently ongoing?
So here again, we know that they have a history. When I say they, I'm talking the packers. They've got a history in their own country with JBS. It shouldn't surprise us. My concern is that if you were to read some things that I've seen said by Sonny Perdue, it almost as if it's like, well, we'll look into it if we see a smoking gun. Well, how much more of a smoking gun do you need to see?
Yeah, exactly.
So to me, it's extremely disturbing. To me, it makes me question as to the USDA's involvement in all of this, if they're willing to look the other way. All to say, it just does not comfort me to see the DOJ's, of course, they had put forth a penalty. All that's good. But at the end of the day, really, what is going to change? I think ultimately what people want to see, if the DOJ is going to get involved, not only do they want to see restitution, they want to see the markets to be changed so that way there would be competition within the future. And I don't think we're going to get that personally. That's the saddest part of all. Yeah, they may get slapped on the hand for a fine, but really, is anything going to change? Will there be competition restored now that it's been brought to light? It's been for so long that it has not proven to be true, and I think a lot of the ranchers are becoming extremely disappointed in any of the oversight.
So you mentioned a change to break up this packing concentration that we see. What do you see happening to the industry if some kind of significant change isn't made to bring about fair cattle markets? Do you think our industry is headed towards vertical integration?
Yes, and I made that comment earlier that on our board we have poultry growers, and they are no longer in the poultry business, and it was simply because of vertical integration. And I think, the importance of them speaking to the Florida cattle rancher, the rancherman, when we were down in Florida, was to show that your day is coming if things are not changed, if competition is not brought back into the marketplace, if vertical integration is not challenged, you will be just like the chicken farmer was, basically working on a system like the lottery system, or the tournament system, right?
Yep.
Do you really want to be a tournament farmer? That's really the question that needs to be asked at this point. And if they say no, well, then you would then simply say, well, then you need to do something different than what you're doing right now. You need to get involved. You need to ask questions. You need to push forth, the checkoff, the legislation, seeking transparency. You need to call for a referendum. You need to get involved with country of origin labeling. You need to ask the tough questions of those who claim to represent you and see how they respond. And if they don't respond favorably to your next, the generation that would be loving to be on your farm, then, you really need to question their allegiance.
As you mentioned a few weeks ago, you were down in Florida for some producer meetings to discuss current industry issues. And as we all know, NCBA was invited to those meetings. However, they refused to attend those meetings because they did not, and I quote, they did not want to interact with what they call domestic terrorists. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's disturbing when an organization reaches to that low, especially since 10 of our board members are still involved in the cattle industry, the chicken, the hogs, the dairy. We are not domestic terrorists. I would think that, it really comes down to the fact that we are challenging NCBA's existence through their checkoff and their recipients of that checkoff. There's no hiding that fact, right?
Right.
We know that they are the recipients of checkoff, so they have something to protect. And it's just unfortunate that it's turned into that they claim that we are a domestic terrorist organization, when in reality all we are seeking is transparency on behalf of the producer. And if that challenges Checkoff, so be it. But I don't believe that we deserve to be called that. Although I will say it's a sign that we are onto real change, because you've heard Gandhi say, as quoted, he says, first they ignore you, and then they laugh at you, then they attack you, and then you win. And I believe that the rancher, the dairyman, anyone who wants to challenge the current system, which currently is, Checkoff is funding a lot of this, which we believe is not in the benefit of the producer and the rancher. We are showing, I believe, as an organization through OCM, the true transparency and the true representation of the individual farmer himself.
As we all know, they're saying that Joe Biden is the next president-elect. How do you see Joe Biden's future administration affecting the cattle industry or agriculture as a whole?
So I see, I'll speak of the positive first. I see him potentially having more interest to listen to the antitrust issues than what the Trump administration had, specifically through Sonny Perdue. I'll say this, that even the Trump supporters, even the Republicans, didn't care for Sonny Perdue. I'm not speaking on a personal level as far as them personally liking him. I think he's a fine person. I just don't think that he helped the producer, the rancher, in any way with his policies. Sonny Perdue mirrored much of what Earl Butz had in 1971 with the get bigger, get out, right? Fence row to fence row planting. And we've seen Sonny Perdue say those very same words and put forth, or at least support, policies that mirror that. So with Biden in office, I will say that there's a better chance that there will be issues to be brought forth and listened to and given serious consideration on the antitrust side. On the downside, I see a lot of effort being put towards the sustainability. You look at Tom Vilsack. He was Secretary of Agriculture during the Obama administration. Tom Vilsack and Biden seem to be pretty good pals. So I see Tom Vilsack having a lot of influence in the industry, in the ag industry going forward. And from a sustainability standpoint, when they start making those requirements like RFID tags, like net zero initiatives, those terms scare me, because they give the power to those who are creating that, what I talked about earlier, that choke point in the center. They're taking away the possibility of the consumers having choice, and they're taking away the opportunity for independents to sell into the marketplace, because they will now somehow create this choke point in the center, and I believe that's coming. And I think that will come faster through Biden's administration than what it would have through Trump. So, you ask the question, right? Good and bad. There you have it. Here's the takeaway. They both lead to consolidation of the industry, right? So this is why I'm kind of torn, because with Sonny Perdue, obviously the bigger get bigger and the smaller go out. That's consolidation. And then you also have, with Tom Vilsack, seeking to create that choke point in the center. And, that only leaves then to those who can sustain themselves, which is typically the larger farms, right? I mean, Look at dairy. They'll put a manure digester on top of a manure pit to gain access to the methane. Well, that's helping net zero carbon emissions, right? That's a good thing. Well, how many small farms are going to have the ability to do that? Very little. That would then mean that further consolidation will be encouraged. Therefore, the small independents go out. So, all to say, here you have a scenario where both aren't necessarily beneficial to the small producer, the independent farmer.
What are some of the main concerns you're hearing from your OCM members that are involved within the cattle industry, or folks that are just involved within agriculture? What are some of their biggest concerns going forward?
I would say the biggest concern would be the fact that we're running out of time. Fred Stokes and many of the other board members who started this organization back in, 20 years ago, they're fighting the same issues that they fought initially 20 years ago. So the concern, obviously, is that what they've seen coming is now coming to fruition, and it's coming at a faster rate. The speed has picked up. So I believe their concern, the concern of OCM in particular, is lack of time to really effectively have change.
Do you have any closing statements you would like to make regarding the cattle industry or any of the issues facing agriculture as a whole?
I would say as a closing statement that, ranchers, producers, anyone involved in agriculture need to get involved and understand how your checkoff dollars are being used, and then also find the value in having consumers understand the food that they are eating and the country in which the food is produced. If this country continues to import at the rate that we do and the consumers are none the wiser, ranchers will no longer be needed in this country. And I think that is a serious threat to the industry in the United States of America.